Hello, you poetic, noble land mermaids. My sister actually just got me this mug for Christmas, and she texted me and she was like, "Hey, when you get a package from this website, don't open it because it's your Christmas present." And so I just promptly forgot, and when it arrived, I was like, "What's this?" And I opened it, and I went, "Oh, who and what are this from?" And then I remembered, and this is actually my way of telling her that I've done this. So thank you for the present, Riley. Appreciate it. I'm sorry. All right, welcome to today's video. This is one that, did you hear my shoulder pop? It popped. It's moving right along. This is one that I've had swirling around in my mind grapes for a long, long time. And I'm really excited about it. And we're just going to get into it. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the way that the cosmetics industry functions and why it makes the decisions that it makes. And specifically, we're trying to address the question that I get asked constantly and that I see constantly, which is why is it that in 2018, almost 19, what a 2019, where are you at? That was a weird thing to do. Why is it that in this day and age, we still are seeing brands that don't have inclusive shade ranges? And I have so many thoughts to share. So I have like a short answer to that question and then a much longer one. And if you're game, I will give you both. So the short answer is racism. It's very short. And now it will, if you care to just join me on a little jaunt down my favorite tangent lane, then I will tell you the story of how business babies are made. All right, so a lot of people, very understandably, operate under the assumption that because the cosmetics industry makes makeup that they sell to predominantly women, that it therefore has like a lot of interest in makeup and or women, but unfortunately that's not usually the case, and let me explain why. Also, couple disclaimers before we get into this. There are a lot of great people within this industry. I'm going to make a lot of sweeping generalizations. So any brand or company that I mention or thing that I say, it's not that I'm saying everything that I'm saying applies to this company. I'm just kind of making I just want to explain sort of how things work on the whole, but there are obviously going to be exceptions within that. So I'm not trying to vilify anyone, but I do want to kind of share some facts. I'm also going to be talking a lot specifically about the relationship of investors to corporations and brands, and I really want to make sure that people understand that that ecosystem of the way that investors partner with founders and brands and companies is not an inherently bad thing. In fact, there are so many technologies and companies that exist that do a lot of good that just couldn't exist if that ecosystem weren't the way that it is. So it's not that those things are bad at all. In fact, we've progressed a lot because of the way that funding can happen now. But the way that things have been handled in this particular industry has some issues like baked right in, and that's what we're going to talk about. And on that note, this is going to seem like I'm straying really far away from what this video seems to be about, but if you just trust me, we're gonna go some places and then we're gonna circle back and it's all gonna make sense. That's the dream. Above all else, I always just strive to make sense, and I achieve my goal most of the time. So, most makeup brands are owned by a handful of very large corporations. So, one corporation could easily own literally dozens of different makeup brands, brands you see at the drugstore that are mid-range, that are high-end luxury brands. It doesn't really matter. Anytime you see these oligopolies where a relatively small group of people are controlling the majority of a market, you end up with some backwards stuff happening. So let's talk a little bit about why things are the way they are. For a really long time, it's been incredibly expensive to start a makeup company, and a big part of that has to do with minimum order quantities. So a small group of corporations own most of the brands, and the vast majority of all makeup brands don't manufacture their own product. They have it made by makeup manufacturing companies, and there aren't a ton of those either. So, small group of corporations own most of the brands, not all, but most of the brands, and then all of those brands are going to a relatively small group of manufacturing companies. Any manufacturing company that's going to have a price point low enough to sustain profitability for a cosmetics company has really, really high minimum order quantities. So typically you're going to see like the minimum order that you could place is like 5 to 10,000 units per color per product. So, for example, if you wanted to start a makeup company and you could just place the bare minimum order for a contract manufacturer, which is still going to have a higher price point than established brands are going to be paying, because the more you order, the less they are per unit. So, still relatively expensive. You're going to be looking at like 5,000 units of each thing. So if you wanted to make 10 different eyeshadow colors and 5 different foundation colors, that means you would need to buy 75,000 individual pieces of makeup. And that's just to place a bare minimum first time order with only 10 eyeshadow colors and 5 foundation colors, which is like far from a complete makeup line, obviously. So that means that in order to start a makeup company, you need enough money to buy a shit ton of products and then operate a company that has a shit ton of products, which basically means you need a lot of capital, which means you need investors. And here is where things get interesting, because investors are not makeup artists. And they are regrettably almost entirely not women. I can't remember the statistic exactly off the top of my head, and I could have looked it up before making this video, but I didn't do that. So it's something like 6% of venture capitalists, which those are like the big dog investors, are women, and around that same percentage of startups, like beginning companies that receive venture capital, are women entrepreneurs as well. So that's a problem. So now's the part where we're really going to start to feel like I'm just getting further and further away from it, but I promise we're coming back. We're going to make it. So an investor's job is to buy percentages of companies in the hopes that the company's value will increase and they will be able to make a profit off of their investment, which is a weird concept. How does owning percentages, I speak very well, of a company translate into money and not just like intangible ownership? I will tell you, usually through a liquidation event, which is classified as one of two things: the sale of the majority shares of a company, or an IPO, initial public offering, which is when a company goes from being privately traded to publicly traded on the stock market. What do those things mean? I will also tell you that. Oh lordy. By the way, I am also obviously oversimplifying some things in this very complex industry for the sake of this video and how it applies to foundation, because I'm probably already giving too much information, as that is my way, but bear with me. So say an investor invests in a company early on and they buy 10% of a company for $1 million. That means that company is worth $10 million. Math. They're hoping that that company is going to become really profitable and increase in the company's value over time. And then later on, say that company is worth $100 million, they can sell more shares of that company to other investors in the future or to another bigger company. And then this thing that they bought for one price is now worth a lot more, and they can sell it for more than they put into it. So a great example of this would be like IT Cosmetics being sold to L'Oreal. And again, not making specific statements about those companies. These are just examples of some facts within the industry. So IT Cosmetics was started for a certain amount of dollars, I don't know, but investors invested in it early on. And then L'Oreal came in and purchased it for $1.2 billion. So the investors who invested early on made a lot of money, because the company was not valued at $1.2 billion when they first bought parts of it. And an IPO is basically when a company doesn't want to sell to a different bigger company or potential competitor, and they want to offer it to the public so that it can be traded on the stock market, and the public can buy little percentages of it if they want to in their hearts. So my point in telling you all of this, other than that it is interesting, is that makeup companies don't actually sell makeup. They sell themselves. And again, not alone, many industries function this way, and it's not an inherently bad thing. The problem, in my opinion, is that makeup is a very personal thing that exists to help men and women who wear it, and it is almost entirely controlled by a group of very predominantly white men who have so little interest in the product itself that there's just going to be fallout from that. Because the bottom line is that makeup is the vehicle to profits in this industry, but the actual product being sold is the profit margins within the company, which is to say, the more profitable the company is, the more interesting it is to other investors, larger companies, and therefore the people who are kind of behind the scenes of all of this. So just to give an example of kind of the female representation situation and using L'Oreal and It Cosmetics again. L'Oreal has existed for over 100 years. They own like 34 different brands just in the US, just in this moment, off the top of my head. And in 2016, they got their first female CEO in over 100 years, which is bonkers. And that was actually when they purchased It Cosmetics, and the CEO and founder decided to stay on as CEO within the company. So just to kind of recap, the main priority of people that are controlling this industry is to increase profits and to avoid risk, because risk, it means risk of profits, which is, there's a logic to that, clearly. But here is where the racist bullshit just kind of sneaks in there, right? Because there are a lot of different factors that go into why certain things have money spent on them within a company and certain things don't. So the answer to the question, why is it that in 2018 we're still seeing foundation shade ranges that are not inclusive, is really another question, which is, can the mostly white dudes who are actually making these products make a lot of money without having to risk investing in women of color? And the answer is yes, like a fuck ton of money. Because what ends up happening is investors invest in a brand and they hire marketing directors and creative directors and people to do market research and chemists, and they put all this information together to go, what are people going to buy? And how can we increase our profit margins the most? And they spend a lot of money on marketing it to people. And I can't tell you how many products there are on the shelf that have gone from their little embryo stage all the way to the market without ever having been touched by a professional makeup artist once. And as I said, they're not particularly interested in spending money on developing more colors and having more shelf space and having more stock to keep track of and pay taxes on, when it comes to the risk of women of color. And I think the reason for that is that we've really proven that white people don't give a shit specifically about women of color. There are a lot of subconscious and sometimes completely conscious ways that we have shown that to be true. And this is not just a makeup issue, this is across the board. I mean, there are even statistics that show that doctors listen to Black women less when they complain about like genuine medical issues that they're having, and it results in drastically increased death in childbirth. So I can talk about makeup because that's what I know about, but certainly this is a bigger issue. I think that a lot of people have these preconceived notions about what types of customers women of color are going to be. Thank you, Rihanna, for just showing that that's a whole load of bullshit. So I think we're kind of working on a spectrum that starts with just sort of general disinterest and a lack of relatability, which is still not okay, all the way to obviously more extreme things. I also wanted to say a little note about racism, because I imagine there are some people that are like, ready to go right now, which is that a lot of people have a very overly simplistic definition of racism. They think that for something to be racist, it has to be like extremely overt, but reality is that it's a lot more nuanced than that and much more widespread. And I think that it's our responsibility as white people, especially, to make ourselves aware of that and just do a little research, because we 100% created and are the problem. So it's kind of like the least that we can do. Yeah. So to circle back a little bit, you have a big industry that is very risk averse and just does not really relate to Black women, and also more than likely a lot of people within it have a lot of underlying and sometimes less underlying racism at work. And the result of that is that shades for women of color don't really get funded when they're making the decisions about what things they're going to spend money on. Another question that kind of gets like, attached like this, like a little piggyback ride to the why is this still happening in 2018, is kind of like the the point that at this point, like, they should know better. Brands are seeing the backlash, which is great. But another trait of really big companies is that they are pretty slow moving, because at that point they have a lot of different board members and people that have to approve things, and because of the risk aversion thing and the number of cooks in the kitchen, it takes them a while. So that's why, you know, sometimes you still see like a big release from a brand and you're like, what are you doing? Because fortunately now, thanks to people who have been outspoken like Jacque Mgido, and the internet making things more accessible for people, and the conversations that are being had, brands are starting to figure it out. I wish that their motives had been different sooner, other than just that it's marketable now, but I'll take it where I can get it, I guess. So, now that we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff that I'm sure lots of people have a whole bunch of opinions about, what can we do about this? The good news is this is such an amazing time to exist. For all the shit that can be rightfully talked about the internet and social media, it's also an incredible tool and a very powerful vehicle for change. And we have the ability now to not only communicate our displeasure at these things, but also to vote with our dollars, which is a phrase that I believe I heard in like a random food documentary a really long time ago, but it's a really good one because brands listen to money more than anything else, with like no close second place, because if you rant online all you want, but you're still spending the money, like, they do not care. So what we can do is we can support brands that are owned by women and that are owned by women of color. Amazing news. There are so many great ones. I will list a bunch in the description box. You can subscribe to Black content creators. You can use makeup made by brands with Black owners, even if you're a white person. And even if you're not doing like a dedicated video about that, which I love seeing that. And a few months ago when that was like really going around, that was really exciting. I just want to make sure that it's not like a moment and it's something that we just do and make normal, because like I said, as white people, we have like just a scotch of responsibility to help out and make sure that everybody is represented, because the issue in this industry is really one of representation behind the scenes, but we can decide that as customers by spending our money certain places and not spending it others. This also, by the way, little side thing, applies to cruelty-free brands for a lot. So one quick thing, a lot of brands that are big and old aren't cruelty-free because that wasn't a thing when they started. However, we're seeing very excitingly that people can turn it around and improve that. Awesome. But for a long time, the group of people who have been fighting for animal rights within the beauty industry was smaller than the country of China. And so because they require animal testing, a lot of brands were like, that's a nice idea, but we don't actually super care because we're going to sell more here than we would to you if we pulled out of that market. And some brands are still making that decision and breaking my friggin' heart, NARS. That wouldn't hurt because they have really good shades also, so thanks for that. Anyway, the point is, this is kind of how things have been, but it is changing, and there's so much control that we have as consumers to ensure that it continues to go in the right direction. Like I said, I'm going to link a bunch of great resources in the bottom, and also just wanted to say that listening is a really powerful tool. I was so fortunate and I'm so grateful that early on in my career, I worked with and had the influence of a lot of women who educated me when it was totally not their job or responsibility, about what I needed to do as a makeup artist and who I needed to make sure I was taking care of and representing. And that's just been like invaluable to me. And thankfully, like I said, we live in a world where information is so accessible. And I think it's really important to, you know, look out and just be educated about stuff as it really is, and therefore what we can do about it. So to kind of sum up, let's not make inclusivity like a trend or a moment, and let's step up and support brands that are doing the things that we want to see, spend our money there, and guess what? Stop spending it to other places. Being vocal also really helps so that they understand why the money's not going there anymore. But ultimately, money is what makes change. No pun intended. So dumb. And I also wanted to make one quick note about smaller indie brands, which are doing a lot of good things. It is really expensive to come out with a lot of different shade ranges. because of that whole minimum order quantity business that I mentioned before, and then just also maintaining that much stock. So when I see a company that obviously doesn't have the same budget as a really big one that's very well funded and maybe owned by a larger parent company, I'm a lot gentler with them and their shade range, but just can I implore you, if you're going to have a small number of shades, make sure that they cover a wide spectrum. You know, if you have a dark shade, don't make it the color of my coffee that has like way too much creamer in it, and I'm not ashamed and I won't change. I can't show it to you without pouring it. Can you see it myself? Oh god! Well, that didn't go well. I almost just poured it in my mouth and then opened my mouth to show you the color, which would be disgusting. And I've already poured coffee on my pants. Really, yeah, just really working hard to undo any smart sounding thing I said. Lest you forget who you're listening to. Alright, well, that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave comments with brands that you like to support and influencers that you like to support. I would love, love, love to see that. And if this video didn't, like, fill you with indignant rage, then you should subscribe to my channel and follow me on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter at KKG Makeup. And I will see you guys later. Bye, little mermaids.